Exercise in a bottle versus exercise in a cup. MOTS-c has earned the nickname exercise in a bottle because of the way it influences cellular energy metabolism. Coffee is probably the most widely used pre-workout on the planet. But if you had to choose one before training, which actually gives you more? And there's a twist here, because if your goal is building muscle, one of MOTS-c's most famous mechanisms, AMPK activation, creates a legitimate question about mTOR and muscle protein synthesis. But there may be a very simple way to address that. And once we do, the real winner might not be MOTS-c or coffee. It might be both. What's up, everybody? I'm Kareem Haskett, a certified biohacking coach and longevity and performance consultant. On this channel, we break down the physiology behind performance, recovery, peptides, hormones, metabolic health, and longevity, so you understand not just what something does, but why it works. Quickly, before we get into it, if you're wondering where I source the compounds I discussed, I use 3 pathways. Physician-prescribed pharmaceutical compounds through a telehealth platform and 503A compounding pharmacy, bioactive precision peptides that are broken down small enough to survive digestion, and a trusted research source for compounds unavailable through my telehealth or bioactive platforms. You can access all 3 through my website at KareemOptimized.com. Link is in the description. Now, before we get into MOTS-c, the standard disclaimer. This content is for educational purposes only and should never be considered medical advice. Peptides, hormones, and other compounds discussed on this channel should be evaluated with appropriately qualified healthcare professional based on your individual health status and goals. Now let's start with the one almost everybody already knows. Black coffee, exercise in a cup. Coffee works primarily because of caffeine, and caffeine's acute performance effects are actually pretty straightforward. One of the biggest is adenosine receptor antagonism. Adenosine gradually accumulates while you're awake and contributes to feelings of fatigue and sleep pressure. Caffeine doesn't eliminate adenosine, it essentially gets in its way. Basically, adenosine is knocking on a door telling your brain it's tired, but caffeine changed the locks. By blocking adenosine receptors, caffeine increases central nervous system activity and can increase alertness, focus, motivation, and perceived energy. And that matters during training because caffeine can reduce your perception of effort. Keyword, perception. The weight hasn't magically become lighter, your muscles haven't suddenly gained new mitochondria, but the work can feel easier to sustain. Unfortunately, Starbucks still hasn't figured out how to put progressive overload in a cup. But there's no doubt that caffeine can improve endurance, performance, repeated high-intensity efforts, and in some circumstances, strength and power output. So black coffee primarily changes how your nervous system experiences the workout. That's extremely useful. But MOTS-c is playing a very different game. MOTS-c, exercise in the bottle, is a mitochondrial-derived peptide, and this is where the comparison gets interesting. Coffee primarily acts through the nervous system. MOTS-c acts much further downstream, at the cellular metabolic level. One of the central pathways associated with MOTS-c is AMPK, AMP activated protein kinase. Think of AMPK as one of the cell's major energy sensors. When cellular energy availability falls and the AMP to ATP ratio rises, AMPK signals we need energy. AMPK is basically your cell looking at the energy account and saying, yeah, we need to stop spending. That shifts cellular metabolism toward a process designed to generate ATP and conserve energy. MOTS-c has also been associated with improved glucose utilization, increased glucose uptake into skeletal muscle, metabolic flexibility and signaling involved in mitochondrial adaptation, and MOTS-c becomes even more interesting because under metabolic stress, it can translocate into the nucleus and influence nuclear energy expression associated with cellular stress and adaptation. That's an important distinction. MOTS-c isn't simply making you feel more energetic, it's interacting with the cellular machinery involved in producing and managing energy. That's why the phrase exercise in the bottle makes sense mechanistically. Exercise itself creates an energetic challenge. AMPK responds, glucose utilization increases, mitochondrial signaling changes, metabolic adaptation follows. MOTS-c touches several of those same pathways, but now we have to address the elephant in the room, the hypertrophy problem. AMPK competing against mTOR. If you're training primarily for endurance or metabolic health, AMPK activation sounds fantastic. But if you're trying to maximize muscle growth, there's another pathway you care deeply about, mTOR. Think of mTOR as the body's ultimate master switch for muscle protein synthesis. Its literal job is to orchestrate the building of new muscle tissue. And AMPK and mTOR have an important relationship. When cellular energy becomes scarce, AMPK can suppress mTOR signaling through mechanisms involving TSC2 and Raptor. In plain English, TSC2 is essentially a cellular stop sign, and Raptor is a core component that helps mTOR latch onto and build muscle tissue. When AMPK is triggered by low energy, it activates that stop sign and blocks Raptor, telling the cell to hit the brakes on growth. And yes, I realize we just went from coffee to something called TSC2 and Raptor. Welcome to peptide science. Physiologically, that makes perfect sense though. Building new tissue is expensive, and if the cell thinks energy is scarce, it doesn't want to spend enormous amounts of ATP building muscle. It wants to restore the energy balance first. So the concern becomes, if I take MOTS-c before lifting and activate AMPK, am I potentially working against the mTOR signaling I'm trying to create through resistance training? Mechanistically, that's a reasonable question. But this is where context becomes incredibly important. Because AMPK and mTOR aren't simply on-off switches where activating one permanently shuts down the other. They're responding to the energetic and nutritional environment of the cell, and that gives us a way to manipulate the environment. Pre-workout nutrition changes the equation. This is where carbohydrates and essential amino acids become important. If you train completely fasted, cellular energy stress becomes part of the training signal. That's one environment. So how does the cell actually know whether it has the raw sources to build muscle? Enter cestrin-2. It acts like a cellular lockbox that detects when essential amino acids like leucine are present, and gives mTOR the green light to start constructing new tissue. So that's the solution. Instead of combining MOTS-c with an empty stomach, you change the cellular environment by feeding the muscle. You enter training with readily available carbohydrates and essential amino acids, specifically leucine. Carbohydrates increase glucose availability and spike insulin. The EAAs provide the actual building blocks in the form of amino acids, and leucine directly unlocks cestrin-2, signaling to mTOR that construction material is fully available. Now you've changed the game. You get the metabolic and mitochondrial signaling benefits of MOTS-c, but by supplying immediate fuel and amino acids, you override the cellular stop sign. You aren't trying to turn AMPK off, you're just making sure your cells don't look around and say, apparently Kareem has stopped feeding us, shut down construction. That doesn't mean AMPK magically disappears, and we don't want it to. The goal is to preserve the metabolic signaling while preventing the environment from becoming unnecessarily hostile to anabolic signaling. That's an important distinction. Like I said, we're not trying to turn AMPK off. We're trying to avoid combining AMPK activation with severe nutrient scarcity. When the primary training objective is hypertrophy, the key is understanding that MOTS-c can still be useful while fed. The science doesn't say that if you're not fasted, you've somehow eliminated the purpose of MOTS-c. That simply doesn't follow physiology. You're still training, ATP demand is still increasing dramatically. Muscle contractions are still creating metabolic stress. Glucose still needs to enter work in muscle. Mitochondria still have to respond to increased energy demand. And the cellular stress response pathways associated with MOTS-c don't suddenly become irrelevant because you consume carbohydrates. MOTS-c doesn't see a carb and say, well, my shift's over. So rather than thinking MOTS-c only works as a fat-burning compound, I think the more useful framework for resistance training is MOTS-c as a metabolic performance and nutrient partitioning tool. You're creating metabolic demand while simultaneously supplying substrate. And working skeletal muscle is one of the places you want those nutrients to go. Okay, remember when this video was about coffee versus MOTS-c? Now that we've taken a brief detour through AMPK, mTOR, TSC2, Raptor, and Cestrin-2, let's actually answer the question about which one wins. If I want an immediate increase in alertness, drive, focus, and reduced perception of effort, coffee wins. Caffeine is exceptionally good at that. But if I'm looking at glucose utilization, cellular energy sensing, mitochondrial signaling, and metabolic adaptation, MOTS-c is operating at an entirely different level. So which one wins for exercise? It depends on what you mean by performance. Coffee primarily helps the brain drive the body. MOTS-c potentially helps the cellular machinery support the work. And that's why I don't actually think this needs to be an either-or comparison. This is where the combination gets interesting. Think about the division of labor. Coffee, central nervous system stimulation. MOTS-c, metabolic and mitochondrial signaling. Pre-workout carbohydrates, readily available training fuel, EAAs and leucine, amino acids plus anabolic nutrient signaling. Now you've attacked the performance from several different directions. The caffeine helps increase alertness and reduce perceived exertion. The carbohydrates provide glucose for high output training. MOTS-c supports the metabolic machinery involved in handling the energy demand. And the EAAs help maintain an environment favorable to muscle protein synthesis. That's a much more complete performance strategy than simply asking coffee or MOTS-c. You addressed in both the neural side and the metabolic side of performance, while still respecting the anabolic objective of the workout. Final verdict. So here you go. Exercise in a bottle versus exercise in a cup. Which wins? For acute stimulation, black coffee. For metabolic and mitochondrial signaling, MOTS-c. For someone whose primary goal is hypertrophy, I will pay attention to the nutritional environment surrounding MOTS-c rather than treating AMPK activation in isolation. Pairing the training window with carbohydrates and EAAs changes that environment substantially. But if you're asking me for the most interesting performance strategy, I wouldn't necessarily choose between the bottle and the cup. I'd put the bottle next to the cup. Coffee helps you feel ready to perform. MOTS-c targets the metabolic machinery that helps you produce the energy to perform. Fuel the workout appropriately. Give the muscle its amino acids. And now those pathways can serve different purposes instead of treating them as competitors. Exercise in the bottle, exercise in the cup. Sometimes the best answer isn't versus, it's synergy. So in summary, coffee and MOTS-c aren't really substitutes. Coffee primarily targets the central nervous system and perceived effort. MOTS-c targets cellular energy, metabolism, and mitochondrial signaling. AMPK deserves consideration when hypertrophy is the goal, but nutritional status matters. Carbohydrates and EAAs provide energetic and anabolic signals that fundamentally change the environment in which AMPK activation occurs. And combining those mechanisms gives you something neither provides alone. Neural drive, metabolic support, training fuel, anabolic substrate. If you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button, drop a comment below, and let me know which comparison you want me to break down next. And make sure you subscribe. because we're going much deeper into peptides, performance, metabolic optimization, and longevity. And if you want to learn more about compounds and strategies I discuss, or you want me to build you a free personalized protocol based on your specific goals, head over to KareemOptimized.com. Everything starts there. I'm Kareem Haskett. Stay informed, stay intentional, and keep optimizing.